Hello, and thank you for joining us here on the Neutral Zone. I am Phil Milani, joined as always by my partner in crime, my esteemed colleague. Really, the best way to describe this person is my everything, and I'm missing him this week. It's at Aric DiLalla.
So we're back to the Zooming. How did this happen?
We've two steps forward, one step backward.
We just got to keep pushing through, I think.
This delay is killing me. Are you okay? What's the internet situation there at the combine?
Oh, it's hurting. It's hurting your feelings. It's nice, Phil. We're at Radio Row. There's a lot of people here. They're all using the internet. It's not quite as it's not up to standard with your studio that you're in right
now. You're buzzing there, huh? You buzzing?
Yeah, that's kind of what you do here at the NFL Scouting Combine.
Tell us about how your week has gone so far, because of course I've been locked in this conference room here at the facility. They won't let me out of here, but they let you out and they let you go do some R things.
Yeah, Phil, it's been nice. We heard from Sean Payton and George Paton on Tuesday, and then Donnie Leach, the Broncos president, spoke to some NCAA interns on Wednesday afternoon. And Phil, as we record this, maybe we'll get some content later from inside the suite where the Broncos will be watching workouts.
Inside the suite there in Indianapolis when they're watching the 40-yard dash. They're watching some 3-cone drill, maybe. What else are they doing?
Okay, all right.
Some vertical leap. I mean, they do all sorts of things in there, but stopwatches out. Binoculars. I mean, pretty much just our setup for a normal game day is what they got in there.
Binoculars. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We'll get into a couple of things on this episode here about what Sean Payton had to say, what George Paton had to say, just about what the Broncos are trying to accomplish this week in Indianapolis. Of course, they're going to be meeting with prospects. They're going to be watching the on-field workouts as they get set for the draft here. But for the Broncos, a lot more going on, considering that free agency is just a couple of weeks away. There's a lot of positions that the Broncos want to address. So we'll get into a little bit about what the Broncos are hoping to accomplish there in Indianapolis. Aric, what you were trying to accomplish was eating shrimp cocktail.
I accomplished that, Phil. I did the job. You sent me here to do one thing, and I did it.
And now you can come back home.
I'm on my way. As soon as we finish recording this, I'm gonna get on my private plane. That, of course, the Neutral Zone. It's got the branding on the side. The team acquired that for us so that we could be as efficient as possible. And I'm gonna head right on back.
What is that branding, Aric? Tell everybody what the branding is.
It's like a sticker. We got a bunch of those stickers on there, and then one giant sticker.
It's our face. Yeah, it's our face.
Yeah,
it's our face. Yeah. Where's Ben Swanson at this week? He's supposed to be helping this Zoom work a little bit better, but I don't know where he is.
Oh, is it not working? It's not working nicely for you, huh? Ben Swanson's here at Radio Row. I would try to turn our whole setup around, but we've got like 8 cameras and a different kind of control panels. And so I don't want to mess with all that, but he's here.
Yeah. Is he going to make an appearance, do you think, or no? Like, will we hear from Ben Swanson?
It's possible. You can hear really anything here at Radio Row.
Yeah, exactly. Aric, why don't you tell everybody how they can get involved in the podcast? Because this is an interactive experience. Pretty much, other than sharing the Zoom link to just hop right in, right up to that, this is an interactive process.
That's right. Phil, you could leave an email at neutralzoneshow@gmail.com. You could leave voicemail at 607-NEUTRAL. You could tweet at us on Twitter at Aric DiLalla with an A, at Phil Milani with a PH, both of those non-traditional spellings. Or, Phil, you could leave a comment right on the Broncos official YouTube page.
And had there been a lot of people there trying to get into the convention center to see you? You know, like a lot of the fans and stuff. You know, what's security like there?
A lot of they got that. The dogs, security dogs, have that dog in them, which is helpful.
Yeah.
they're keeping us safe from the kind of the rabid neutral zone fans that are they're really lining the streets, and they won't see you. They heard you weren't. They turn around, and Ben Swanson said, "Doesn't anybody want to see me?" And they didn't want to.
They didn't want to. No, I trust that he still has his flannel shirt on though.
But two of them actually. It's kind of like a nice layered look. You got one that's unbuttoned, and then one underneath that is buttoned up.
And if people are watching on YouTube,
nodding in agreement.
Not what?
He's nodding in agreement.
Oh, good. I was going to say, if people are watching on YouTube here, they'll notice some free pub for the Indianapolis Colts behind your shoulder there too. Not by
I'm just trying to give everybody a sense of what it's like here in Radio Row. I'd spin the computer around, but again, too many monitors to put out of the way. But Phil, I can see the Steelers, I can see the Cowboys, the Lions, the Titans. I don't know what happened to ours. It got lost in transit. I think Ben Swanson was supposed to bring it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's get to a couple of YouTube comments here, Aric. But did you die? ? Exclamation point says LMFAO. Good podcast, guys. Great podcast, guys. Let me know the news while also making me crack up. Very nice.
I like it.
Dominic Cavazos. There is a visual element necessary to experience the show. Really missing out if you're not watching. Aric, Phil, and Ben, which he spelled all incorrectly. Top 10 R's in the league right now. Thank you very much.
Top 10, top 5. Top 5.
Top 5.
And we're not one.
And we're not. Yeah. Brady Dyer says, quote, he'll be around Garrett Bowles sometimes. Then next quote, why? Of course, that's in reference to what we were talking about last week with the addition of Vance Joseph.
I think Ben Swanson said that he would be around Garrett Bowles.
Around Garrett Bowles.
We were confused.
Francisco Joaquina. You guys are the Batman and Robin of podcasters. Robin was Batman's everything. That is true.
It's true.
Let's see. Hold on. I got a couple more here. Hold on a second. Killer 35 Durant says you got to get Dion's terminology right. You're either elevated or terminated. That does sound better than what we were talking about. Jeremy says the sarcasm is what makes the show good. The sarcasm. Panorama Black. True. Shout out Nikola Jokic. That's every day. There were a lot of comments last week here, Aric. Hold on one second. There's one that I want to get to. There's a lot that I want to get to. Hold on. Jeremy, is Phil still giving some stickers?
Of course.
I don't know. Okay, this one's from Adam Kern. Phil, I got 6 thumbs up because you said you have to watch on YouTube. You can listen on Spotify, but you have to watch on YouTube is what I was responding to. Don't make me sound silly because you can't remember what I said. You are silly. Love the show. Then he comments, by next episode, you won't even remember what this is in reference to either. And that is true. I don't know what you're talking about. I do not know what you're talking about. So sorry about that.
This is a 1 week at a time. And
yeah. And then the last one is No Hot Soup says, wait, you guys do shout outs. Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Obviously.
All right, Aric, let's get into our first topic and really the only topic here, and that's just talking about what the Broncos are hoping to achieve during this week out in Indianapolis. And let's just start out by talking about one of the top free agents the Broncos have. That's Dre'Mont Jones. George Paton said that he's going to be meeting with Dre'Mont's agent this week in Indianapolis. What are you hearing on that?
Yeah, Phil, it sounds like based on what George Paton has said, that things are very positive. with Dre'Mont Jones. And, we'll just have to see what happens in terms if they're able to get a deal done. We've seen some reports that suggest the Broncos will not use the franchise tag. Obviously, they have a few more days to do that if they want to. But it sounds like they're going to stay away from that approach. I think we've seen another report that suggests Dre'Mont might even test free agency. But obviously, as an unrestricted free agent, as a unrestricted free agent for the Broncos do have this next window of 12, 13 days to negotiate exclusively. So there is still time between the franchise tag deadline and the start of free agency where they could get something done. So just because they don't use the tag doesn't mean he's automatically going to make it to free agency. But again, Phil, the deal has to make sense on both sides, right? Because he's the guy that they've talked about as a core player. They want him in Denver. They want him around. But the deal has to make sense for the Broncos. It has to make sense for Dre'Mont Jones. He had a little bit of a kind of a low end to this, just one sack after Bradley Chubb left Broncos. But still a really player, a good interior pass rusher. And the Broncos are going to have to make some decisions because Deshaun Williams is also a free agent. You've got some young guys there, but listen, if you let Dre'Mont Jones go, you've got to replace him somehow. So if a possible might want to get it done so you don't have another hole for the Broncos.
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting situation here because interior pass rush is like in high demand. That's the fastest way to the quarterback is right up the middle there. And if you have a guy who's dominant at that position, that could really be the anchor to your defense. And so all teams are looking for that kind of a player. And the Broncos have a guy who they have a lot of confidence in, but the production maybe hasn't been there consistently. Do you know what I mean? There's times where Dre'Mont really flashes. I think back to that Jets game where he had back-to-back sacks, on consecutive plays there. So we know what Dre'Mont can be. Now, can he be that all the time? And I guess that's the question the Broncos are going to have to answer because they're going to have to pay him a lot of money if they want him to stay here in Denver. So a difficult position to be in because I think you would have, if you would have seen Dre'Mont continue his early season success after Bradley Chubb left, then this would have been a no-brainer, but the fact that that didn't happen, the fact that he ended the season with some injury issues there, that just makes you pause a little bit on giving him all this money. And, Vance Joseph is going to have to come in here, evaluate this roster, come up with a plan for what he wants the defensive line to look like, because we do know the Broncos are going to have to find some sort of additional pass rusher on the outside to go along with Randy Gregory and Baron Browning. So this defensive line, it seems to be up in the air a little bit here, Aric, right now.
Yeah, definitely. And what's interesting, Phil, is when the Broncos traded Bradley Chubb, there was a sense that money was going to go to Dre'Mont Jones and that this was kind of a formality that was going to get done. George Paton talked about him as a player. He's talked about him again and again. He said, we want to draft guys, develop them, and sign them to second contracts. And so when you got rid of Bradley Chubb and got the first round pick for him, I think everybody thought, hey, it's just a matter of time before Dre'Mont Jones gets a deal done with the Broncos. I think some people thought maybe it would get done in season. And for whatever reason, it didn't get done. And then the weeks kept going by and the production was not there. And he was kind of at that sack total. And we've seen him now, Phil, whether it's having a hot start to the season or having a strong finish to the season, he's kind of been around that 6.5 sack mark, 5.5 sacks, basically every year. And so if you're the Broncos, you've got to figure out, well, does he have that extra gear to get to 10 or 12 sacks? Can he be the best player on a defense? Or does he need to be a second guy? Does he need a game-changing pass rusher on the outside to allow him to do what he does best? Or can he be that top guy? And if, in my mind, if you believe he can be a top guy that can get 12 to 14 sacks, 10 sacks, then maybe he's worth that money. But if you decide, hey, he's the second guy and you need a Randy Gregory to have 15 sacks to really open up Dre'Mont's potential, then you've got to consider maybe you can't go as high. And obviously the Broncos, if they don't franchise him, that speaks to kind of where maybe they view his value, because I believe that's right around 19 million right now. And so if they don't go to that, you would just kind of infer that any offer they're making long term is less than that, obviously. And so we don't know what that range is. We don't know what they're offering. We don't know what Dre'Mont Jones wants at this moment. But you're right, Phil. He's kind of this first domino to fall, maybe, and then you decide, okay, what do you do with Deshaun Williams? Do you go after somebody else in free agency? Do you go after some of the draft in the third round when you finally get a pick? But Phil, the other thing to consider is if you let Dre'Mont Jones test free agency, or he goes and tests free agency, and then you find somebody else that you want to deal with, well, then maybe the door closes for Dre'Mont, even if he wants to come back. And so there's a lot of moving pieces here for the Broncos.
Yeah, I just think that he's in an interesting position because you talk about the deal wanting to make sense for both sides. A guy like Dre'Mont, who's come in and had some success here over his first 4 years in the league. This is from his perspective, he's thinking, okay, now this is my payday. This is the time where over the course of my NFL career, this is when my stock is going to be the highest, this second contract here. And then from the Broncos perspective, I just think that there's a lot of question marks around Dre'Mont and what he could eventually become. And they're going to have to try and see if they can find some middle ground here. If not, then I do see a situation where Dre'Mont is testing the market. And, in that situation, more times than not, a team out there is going to be willing to pay money when the Broncos maybe are hesitant to do that. And look, Dre'Mont was a third-round pick. So you would think that with some good scouting, with some good diving here, maybe the Broncos could find another talent like Dre'Mont with one of their first 2 picks in this year's draft. So you just have to do what's best for the organization if you're George Paton, Sean Payton here. And, that's another thing that we learned on Tuesday this week was that, Sean is continuing to learn more and more about this Broncos roster. And, they're going to have to figure out which one of these pieces, if they fit or not with what they are hoping to build here in Denver.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just a decision about Dre'Mont or no Dre'Mont. It's about, hey, how could you use that cap in future years? It's about, do you think you can draft and develop a guy, like you mentioned, Phil, and being the guy that Dre'Mont is? How do you want to allocate your resources along the defensive line? What types of players fit Vance Joseph's scheme? All those things are going to go into this. And so I think it's easy for fans to just think, okay, well, keep Dre'Mont. He's a good player.
Yeah.
Sure, you want to keep good players. That's true. But there's a lot more that goes into it than that. And I just want to say, Phil, you talked about, him hitting free agency and testing the market. All it takes is one team to say, we're going to pay you a lot of money. And then all of a sudden the market changes significantly. It doesn't matter if, teams aren't willing to pay you that. You only need one to change the market here for Dre'Mont Jones. When you let a guy get to free agency, it does become tricky to keep them, in my mind, because if one team really needs a defensive end or really wants a star defensive player, they'd say, hey, here's more than the franchise tag. And I assume you're going to jump at that. So it's not, free agent isn't always logical from that standpoint.
Yeah. That's why so many of these guys, if they can identify talent that is on the rise, you try to get that deal done in the season. And then that way you don't let it get to free agency. You don't get the pressure of a deadline looming. And then that way you could just make a decision and then move forward here. And that usually tends to work out for the team side a little bit better here. But, the interesting thing about that for the Broncos is that probably when you're looking to make those deals, that's when Dre'Mont's production fell off. So, on the flip side, you're thinking, okay, from the Broncos perspective, hey, if you could have got this done in the season, maybe you could have saved some money. But then on the other side of that equation, hey, maybe you avoided a bad situation here by investing a lot of money in a player that doesn't have that upside. So Dre'Mont is a fascinating situation here just because he's shown a lot of flashes that he could be that dominant guy, but just the consistency hasn't been there. And look, part of talent evaluation is sort of trying to predict the future, and that's not necessarily easy to do in a case like Dre'Mont Jones.
No, I mean, you, of course, are able to predict the future well. You know everything that is going to happen. So we wish they would just kind of ask you what to do here.
I have that crystal ball just sitting in my desk drawer. And
yeah,
I stopped by.
It's like they don't even care about it.
I'm like, hey, George, Sean, you guys want to check this thing out, or what do you want to do? And they're just like, go back to your hole, So I don't know why.
The other thing with Dre'Mont is that if he, you make a good point, you make a deal, and then he play what he did the rest of the year, you might be looking at it and saying, "Oh, is that a good deal?" But the flip is that if he had finished the season, if he kept going and finished the season with 12 sacks, say, then you probably are not hesitating about using a franchise tag at this point. You're probably just
doing it. Yeah. Are you still there, Eric?
I'm still here.
Oh,
now you talk.
You cut out a little bit there, so I wasn't sure if you were still okay.
No, I think that it's kind of the worst possible scenario was Dre'Mont having that fast start and then falling off, because it's not good for Dre'Mont in terms of guaranteeing a contract good for the Broncos, because they didn't they're now kind of in this limbo where you're just trying to decide which player are you going to get moving forward long term here.
And so what's going on there in Indy this week is that George is going to be meeting with his Dre'Mont's representation there, trying to just sort of see if they can figure out some of the numbers and what makes sense for both sides. But also maybe the Broncos are doing a little bit of homework, checking out the rest of the league, being like, hey, what is a guy like Dre'Mont's value like? You mentioned, Eric, hey, all it takes is one team. Do you think that George is also trying to figure out, hey, is there a team out there that really wants Dre'Mont? What's that market look like? Because the Broncos obviously want to address their defensive line. So maybe he's saying, okay, what's this defensive line market look like across the league?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is where you try to mine as much information as you can, whether it's on Dre'Mont's value, what other teams need, what other players might be available. I believe, Phil, as we're recording this, only one player has been franchise tagged. And so maybe you try to get a sense of who else is out there. Are there going to be big name free agents that we can go after? Then here, Dre'Mont. I think all of those things are, obviously one of the goals is to sit here and interview prospects, to watch prospects work out. But then the other thing is, hey, can you find out some information about who's going to be available here in less than?
Yeah. And so talking about Dre'Mont, that's also going to impact what the Broncos are able to do with the offensive line, and I think that if you talk to any Broncos fan, it's clear that the number one priority is offensive line. Everybody's talking about getting this thing fixed. What happens with Dre'Mont is going to impact what the Broncos can do there. How do you weigh those two, Eric? Which is a bigger priority in your mind?
Well, I think offensive line stands out, particularly if you're able to get a really solid right tackle. You can find a guard that can just solidify that spot. I personally would look at the draft for a guard and go free agency for tackle. But you've got to figure this out. You've got to protect, and you've got to build this thing up front in order to make this thing go. And I just think because she's an offensive coach, you've got to. I think that has to be the priority.
I agree. And you look at some of those teams that they had there in New Orleans, they were very stout up front. Drew Brees obviously helped that offensive line a lot there, but they were stout up front. And that sort of is what makes this whole thing work, right? It helps the running game. It helps keep Russell Wilson healthy. It gives him more time to be able to do his freelancing, where you see him have so much success in the past there, where he gets out of the pocket, he could find that receiver down the field. It all really starts up front. And the Broncos just were not good enough there last year. I don't think that that's any secret. You know, the running game struggled to find a lot of success. And obviously, Russell Wilson was sacked a bunch of times, had to miss a few games last year. So it really, to me, it starts up front. And, you know, you hope that Garrett Bowles can come back and play the way he did in 2020. But, you know, obviously a big leg injury last year. You're hoping he could come back. You got to figure out what you're doing at the center position with Lloyd Cushenberry, if that's your guy moving forward. And then it seems like maybe Quinn Miners is that younger guy that you'll be able to rely upon at right guard. But the rest of this thing, you got to figure this thing out.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, you got to decide how many veterans do you want on there? How much do you want to build it from scratch? I think I saw a story today, Phil, that when Sean Payton first got to New Orleans, they selected 3 offensive linemen in the 3rd round and beyond, and 3 of those guys ended up being starters for their Super Bowl team. And so it is possible to find people later in the draft. But man, when you're looking at free agent priorities, I would think that at least one offensive lineman has to be up there, and you might view that as more of a priority than the defensive line, a better allocation of resources.
Yeah. I do think that ultimately for the success of this team, the offensive line has got to be priority number one. And I do see at least one in free agency, just a guy who, you know, that could come in and start on day one. You know, not a guy who is going to be a little bit of a project that you're going to have to coach up and get right. You need somebody who's going to be able to be relied upon starting week 1.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think with the kind of the young talents, we don't know exactly the Broncos have a deep line from like a Inyomo Wazariq or a Matt Henningsen, but you do have some younger guys there that maybe can develop. You don't necessarily have that on the offensive line. And so I feel like replenishing the talent there is a bigger, you know, that's more important. You don't kind of, oh, here's this young tackle that could potentially step in. Here's this young guard. You know, I guess if you look at like a Luke Wattenberg, but he obviously struggled a little bit. So that to me stands out as a place where he's an influx of talent away.
Have you seen Luke in the weight room? You know, when you're in there at like 5 o'clock, are you showing him how to do some things in there, or what have you been doing?
I like to work in darkness, of course. So it's hard to tell who else is in there.
Oh, so you don't even turn on the lights. It's dark outside and inside for you.
Yeah, that's what they say. Work in the darkness, and then you see the light later.
Yeah, got it. You shine in the light.
You see. Yeah, but I work.
You work.
Sean Payton wants keep your head down and work. I think he said we're anonymous donors.
Yeah,
that's kind of the perspective I have right now.
Aric, these press conferences at the combine, they're always sort of interesting to me because you don't want to say too much when you're up there, but you got to talk for, 15, 20 minutes. What do you make of Sean Payton's press conference? He talks about paying attention to every little detail and everything. What stood out to me was he started his press conference early. He went late, and he was very honest when he was up there, very transparent, particularly when talking about the hiring process for a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, Phil, I was hoping we would get to that because I think that was probably the biggest takeaway is that he kind of admitted Vic Fangio was the guy that went after originally that he wanted to work with. Said the media spin a little bit, maybe. Also has Vance Joseph. And listen, if you're Vance Joseph, people might think, okay, well, how does Vance Joseph feel here and that? I think Vance Joseph realizes the resume that Vic Fangio has at defensive coordinator and is confident enough in his own scheme to recognize that, going to look around at some other people. Talked about, he was asked, there was a report that you interviewed Matt Patricia, and he said, no, that happened.
Yeah.
And that, about things that are going to happen this week. There's also a plan to talk with Tricia about a potential role on the defensive staff. And he would ask Vance Joseph about what he thought of that too. But to be honest, gave you a nugget here. But I think it was not lost, people. He started early and he ended late, and a lot of good stuff in between.
He also told the person sort of running the press conference, they got this 15-minute window typically there, and they like to move it along. There's somebody who's there helping him, said, hey, just a couple more questions. And Sean said, no, there's actually going to be a lot more. So another opportunity there to exert a little bit of dominance, let everybody know who's in control here. You talk about details, Aric. These things aren't lost on Sean. And as a reporter, I feel like picking up on a little bit of these things gives you a little bit of insight into his thinking and what some of his philosophies and what he's all about.
Absolutely, Phil. He set the tone. I think just kind of saying, hey, we're going to take more questions. That's a way to set it. It might seem minor and it might have been lost on some fans. If you don't pay attention to these press conferences kind of really in depth, but not lost on either of us. I'll tell you that. And in everything he does, just kind of in the way, and Phil being here, reporters are some scrums where there's not as many reporters. I'll tell you what, his scrum had a lot of people on it. It was the first one of the entire combine. I think that sets the tone too. Say, I'm first one up there. I'm going to kick this thing off. But there are times when people are yelling, they're trying to get a question in, and Sean started pointing to hey, you're next, you do this. And he's running the show up. And I think that's the way, you expect to do everything and to lead the coaching staff, to lead players. He is in charge, setting the tone. He's telling people how it's going to be. And when you've got a resume like he does, 7 division titles, 9 playoff appearances, a Super Bowl, you have the right to do that, right?
Exactly. And he said this was the first time he'd ever done a press conference at the combine, but just based off the way he was carrying himself, you wouldn't have thought that, he was very much in command up there. And I think that a younger head coach is just sort of trying to go with the flow a little bit. Hey, what am I supposed to be doing? There's only a couple more. Okay. What's the next thing? Where am I doing next? How is this going to work? It's quite the opposite with Sean up there. And you could just feel that sort of from his presence and the way he carries himself a little bit. And I think that because he's so in control and in charge, that allows him to be more transparent, because he's not like, what can I say? What shouldn't I say? He's very much in control. And because he's able to give you things like, hey, we're going to talk to Matt Patricia. And even though we didn't hire him for the defensive coordinator spot, we still think maybe there's going to be a role here for him. That's sort of a big deal, if you ask me. And he felt very comfortable just saying that up there.
Yeah. And Phil, if he does say too much, well, he's in charge. So what does it matter?
Exactly. Who's he going to answer to? Just back to himself. So it's perfect. It's perfect. What do you think about that, Aric, about Patricia possibly having a role on this team? Do you think that it would be weird with Vance Joseph just because they were both up for that job? And what do you think Patricia might be able to bring as a sort of a senior advisor consultant type of role?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think Vance Joseph is confident enough in himself. Seen him around a little bit this week. Is confident in his ability to do this job. Did a nice job in Arizona. It was interesting listening to both Sean and George Paton talk this week. They made it sound like Arizona was kind of they said he did some really good things despite the circumstances. And you heard that a couple times. And so we look at the numbers and we see, okay, a couple seasons overall in scoring defense, but the way they sounded was like they were really impressed he was able to do that there based on everything else that was going on. So one kind of check in Vance Joseph's call there. But, Matt Patricia, obviously our head coach, did not go particularly well, but still has that experience. Obviously had success with the Patriots. I think a run game, he'd be able to help you there. Kind of, we hear Vance Joseph talk about an attacking defense. He's obviously, I would say, kind of, before being a defensive coordinator, his spell was in Indy. So you have somebody here that can help in the run game. I think it would be a good addition. And listen, just so when you think about the comparison to last year's coaching staff and how much inexperience there was and guys doing jobs for the first time, everybody being promoted and elevated. You look at this coaching staff and you see, okay, you've got a former head coach in Vance Joseph. You've got experienced offensive coordinator in Joe Lombardi. You could potentially have their head coach, Patricia. I'm sure I'm missing, but like John Morton, the pass game coordinator, has a lot of NFL experience. Even the assistant to the head coach, he's got 2 decades of experience. I think you look all over this staff, you see guys that have done this before. Greg Menacke, one of the linebackers coaches, he's been a defensive coordinator in this league for a long time. And just listen, put some chances on some younger coaches for sure. But you got that experience last year staff just didn't have. And so when things get tough, or when in terms of player development, I think that's going to have a big impact. And I was thinking about this last night, Phil. Some of the rookies with the Broncos, like a Nick Bonito, maybe you didn't get what you thought you were going to get out of him. Well, okay, now you've got a more senior coach who's probably has more experience developing players. You could get some jumps out of these guys just because they're now working with a different staff.
Most definitely. I mean, one of the things we talked about with Nathaniel Hackett coming in here when he put that staff together was, hey, maybe you don't want guys with too much experience because then that sort of threatens your power or the way you're perceived as a young head coach. Okay, that's certainly not the case with Sean. You don't have to worry about any of that. You have a much more experienced staff coming together. Sean Payton said that Broncos owner and CEO Greg Penner texted him and was like, hey, I like the staff that you're putting together. I think that this is coming together nicely. You always want to hear that encouragement. And then Sean also said, look, one of the things I learned from Bill Parcells was you want to be around younger coaches because they bring something new to the table. There's some diversity there and opinions and perspectives there when you're around a younger head coach. And certainly somebody like Davis Webb, who took snaps last year and is younger than Russell Wilson, he's going to come in here and he's got certainly a different perspective than someone like Sean, who's coaching Russ. There's just going to be different viewpoints on this, and that's always a healthy thing, in my opinion.
You think about a guy like Chris Banjo coming in, assistant special teams coach. That's not the most prompt, but he was playing in this league last year. I think guys like that are going to be able to players. It keeps this pipeline of young talent, helps them learn, I think, probably a little quicker, being around a lot of experienced guys. And listen, you can critique. I don't think Sean Payton's track record is immune from being able to say, okay, well, why did you make this decision or this decision? But I also think he earns the benefit of the doubt. And, I look at this staff and I said, okay, it does look like and it look, there's some really good experienced coaches and there's some good younger coaches. And I trust that this is going to work.
Yeah, and you want a mix of guys, right? You like having a guy like Lombardi come in. That's helpful just because there's some consistency and familiarity with the scheme and the way you like to coach things and your approach. But then you also have some other guys in the mix there that help this thing have some different viewpoints and come together maybe with a fresh approach. So it does seem like the staff has come together well. And certainly maybe there's some additions on the way here if they can figure out something with Patricia, or maybe if there's some other people he bumped into there in Indy. Heck, maybe you'll be a part of the staff, Aric. Hey, you were writing last year. You were covering this team last year. Let's get you involved in the coaching a little bit.
Bill, I wouldn't leave you behind.
Thank you. I know. You at least you could do a podcast too, and then also coach. A little bit of a dual.
That's
role.
true. I have a little bit of both.
I'll be like, what happened there at the end of the game? What were you guys thinking? And you were like, shut up.
I say that anyway.
Last thing, Aric, just what is sort of the buzz there about the Broncos in Indianapolis? Is there a little bit of hesitancy to get too excited about this team based off of what happened last year? Do people think that Russ is going to be okay here under Sean? I know that we heard Pete Carroll. He said, hey, we think that, or he thought that there's nobody better than Sean Payton to coach Russell Wilson here moving forward. So what's the thoughts on the Broncos and Russell Wilson there in Indy?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a mix. I think there's guys like Chris Sims that I've talked to have said I'd be really shocked if this time next year we're talking about other see Russell Wilson, that he thinks that's a great opportunity for him, and that Sean Payton is going to get him back to being that guy. Talk to other people that say, well, Sean Payton's not going to change his system, and so is Russ capable of operating in this precision passing model? I think, well, like we've talked about, Phil, the perspective is the offensive line is that biggest need. You've got to up front for this team to be good next year. I would just, overall, it's not surprising. Just what is Russ and Sean going to look like? And that's going to be a determining factor. And we know, I think that the big question, we might know till week 1 or the preseason kind of exactly what it looks, but I think that's the kind of the big question. There's no broad proclamations about like, hey, if Russell Wilson and Sean Payton get this right, they're going to be Super Bowl contenders. I think a lot of the focus, including in the questions I ask, is less about, hey, what sort of playoff potential do the Broncos have, and more just how can they get back to being relevant? And then, if things do go well, maybe you end up in that playoff talk, that playoff conversation later. But for the moment, I think it's less compared to last year when there was a lot of hype and people, obviously not at the combine because the Russell Wilson trade had happened, but so later we're talking about, it's Super Bowl or bust, all this. Right now, it's just, hey, how is this going to work? Let's pump the brakes on everything else and just see how this relationship develops.
And based off of that, and like not being these crazy expectations or pressure put on the Broncos, the fact that they only have 5 draft picks, Aric, what do you think? Do you think the Broncos are going to be big players here in free agency, or do you think they're just going to try to address some needs? Where do you think they stand here as we're just a couple of weeks out?
Yeah, I think there's a sense that the Broncos might make at least one move in free agency. Maybe on the offensive line, we'll have to see exactly if that pans out or if that happens. But yeah, I think in general, the buzz around the draft picks is a little bit down because Broncos perspective, you don't pick until 67. And so it's hard to go up there and go, well, are you going to be there in the 3rd round or what?
Yeah.
It's hard to get a sense of exactly which player stories you should dive into. So a little bit less buzz about that and more about, what are the Broncos going to do in free agency? Is Alex Singleton going to be back? What position groups kind of more broadly you look at? I mean, there's no one's here saying, hey, this particular offensive tackle in the 1st round is going to be a great option for the Broncos, the way that a few years ago you discussed, wide receivers. I mean, it's not that sort of year with the way the draft is setting up for the Broncos. I mean, there's a shortage of storylines. They're just different.
And so, like, from that perspective, if it sort of does feel like if the Broncos want somebody to come in here and make a huge impact and sort of change the way that this team looks, it's going to have to be through free agency.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like Will Berry came in the 3rd round a couple of years ago and was an instant starter. There are, other examples of guys coming in Greg Dulcich, 3rd rounder, played a big impact. Damari Mathis by week 5 was a starter. There are guys that can come in and be starters, but in terms of being like Pro Bowl, All Pro, that sort of level, you're right. I do. You would need to take a swing free agency for that to happen. You just have to weigh the risk of, okay, well, is that worth the cap space? Do we want to just develop some younger guys and say, okay, we're okay with having an All Pro on the offensive line this year, or we're hoping that Garrett Bowles can be that guy, and we're going to draft around him and build this thing up a little bit more slowly. And again, that's decisions that George Paton and Sean Payton are going to have to make.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what approach they take, and it'll sort of let you know where they're thinking this team is heading for the 2023 season, the approach that they take here. So certainly a lot of good stuff going on out there in Indianapolis. hearing from Sean Payton and George Paton this week there. Aric, nice job barring from Indianapolis.
You got it. My best.
We got your best, yeah. Let's get some shout outs going here before we say goodbye.
Yeah. I will shout out Sean. First time in 16 years he spoke at the combine and made it worthwhile. Like you said, got a lot of stuff in there in 25 minutes, I think.
Yeah. He did get a lot of stuff in there. That was good stuff. PR guru, I think that's what he likes to go by. Patrick Smythe got him up on that podium. So that was good stuff. Good stuff there. Of course, I wasn't there because he doesn't do that much media, Aric. So it's sort of a down.
Yeah, that was the ball.
Of course, shout out Nikola Jokic. Of course. Continues to average a triple-double. The Nuggets kind of playing pretty good basketball here, if you ask me. So
I would say there's more chatter here about Nikola Jokic than there is about any prospect. I mean, people are just in the city of Indianapolis they're dialed in on your Denver Nuggets.
Of course, the big news with Jokic this week is that he's a stats padder. That came from Kendrick Perkins. And then Jokic, when asked about it, said, yeah, of course, it's true. It's true. A little bit of tongue-in-cheek there from Jokic, which was pretty funny, if you ask me. Pretty funny stuff.
Yeah. I mean, if it was easy to do, everyone would just do it, right?
Correct. Yeah, correct. Yes, exactly.
Like, I hope that Russell Wilson stat pads touchdowns in 2023.
Could be a good idea.
Yeah.
You know, hey, the Broncos are up 34-14, but let's go ahead and get another touchdown. Let's do it.
Yeah, perfect.
I would like that.
You have to be to pad the stats in order to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a good idea. Let's do that. Let's just do that.
Let's do more points.
Any other shout outs, Aric? This is a big week for some of those prospects out there. I'm sure there's a lot of nervous energy, getting set to go through this week. Some guys' draft stocks could take off this week. Some might go down. This is a big week for a lot of young guys there in Indianapolis.
It is, Phil. Yeah, and best of luck to those guys. Nice to see some of our other R's around the league. Our friend Eddie with the Raiders. I mean, this is nice to see some of these guys.
Friend of the show.
Yeah, friend of the show. Liz Gerald's too, of course, Phil. Can't forget that. Even from Indianapolis.
No, I mean the work in the community never stops. So
no.
Even a guy like Ramon Cezanne is doing a lot of great work this week. So
yeah, of course. That's what we come to expect.
You can't forget anybody. So Aric, great job out there reporting from Indianapolis. It's time for you to come home, for us to be reunited so that order can be restored in the podcasting universe.
I'm on my way.
Yeah, hurry on up back home. But that's going to do it for us. Maybe Ben Swanson will make an appearance next week. Maybe he'll get left in Indy. Maybe you'll forget him. Who knows? Who knows what will happen? So, all right. Well, that's going to do it for us. We'll be back next week in person, back in our regular podcast studio. Until then, for Aric DiLalla, I'm Phil Milani. You've been listening to The Neutral Zone.